The small bell above the shop door hadn't rung in over 2 hours. Robert sat hunched over his workbench, squinting in the dim light as he carefully stitched the sole of a worn leather boot. His fingers moved with practiced precision, even though they ached from the cold. The tiny repair shop smelled of leather polish and old glue, scents that had become as familiar to him as breathing. Outside, the winter evening had settled in early. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows through the shop's dusty window. Robert glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:30. Most businesses on this street had already closed, their owners heading home to warm dinners and comfortable couches. But Robert had at least 5 more hours of work ahead of him. He'd been a shoe repairman for more than 20 years now. It wasn't the life he'd imagined as a young man, but life has a way of leading you down unexpected paths. 3 years ago, his world had shattered when his wife Linda passed away suddenly. A heart attack, the doctors said. She was only 41. One day she was laughing in their kitchen, planning their daughter's birthday party. The next day she was gone. Since then, Robert had been both mother and father to their 2 kids. His daughter Sophie was 15 now, studying hard at the local high school. His son Tommy had just turned 12, all energy and curiosity and endless questions about how things worked. They were good kids, patient kids, the kind who pretended not to notice when dinner was just rice and beans again, or when their dad came home so tired he could barely speak. Robert set down the boot and stretched his stiff fingers. The shop was cold. He'd turned down the heat to save on the electricity bill. Every dollar mattered when you were raising 2 kids on a shoe repairman's income. He did the math in his head constantly, like a song that never stopped playing. Rent was $800 a month. Sophie's school fees. Tommy's growing feet that needed new shoes every few months. Though Robert tried to make his old pairs last as long as possible. Groceries, utilities. The numbers never quite added up the way he wanted them to. Last month, Sophie had come home with a permission slip for an art summer camp. Her eyes had been bright with hope. She loved drawing, spent hours sketching in her notebooks. The camp cost $300. Robert had looked at that paper for a long time, his heart breaking before quietly filing it away in a drawer. Sophie never asked about it again. She'd just nodded when he didn't bring it up and gone back to her homework. That quiet acceptance hurt worse than if she'd cried. Tommy's shoes were too small. Robert could see it in the way his son walked, trying not to wince. But Tommy never complained, just said they were fine when Robert asked. 12 years old and already learning to swallow his needs. What kind of father let his kids sacrifice like that? The kind who skipped lunch most days to make sure there was enough food at home. The kind who worked 16 hours a day and still came up short. Robert rubbed his eyes. He was tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. The bell above the door suddenly chimed, startling him. An elderly woman stepped inside, moving carefully on the icy sidewalk. She wore an expensive wool coat and carried a shopping bag from one of the nicer department stores downtown. Robert stood up, wiping his hands on his work apron. "Good evening," he said, managing a warm smile despite his exhaustion. "How can I help you?" The woman approached the counter, her face lined with worry. She pulled out a pair of men's dress shoes from her bag. Even from a distance, Robert could tell they were high quality, real Italian leather, hand-stitched, but they were in bad shape. The soles were separating, the stitching torn in several places, and the leather was scuffed and cracked. "Can you fix these?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I know they look terrible. Several other shops said they weren't worth repairing, but these were my husband's favorite shoes. He wore them to every important event in his life. Our wedding, our children's graduations, his business meetings." She paused, her eyes glistening. "He passed away 6 months ago. I can't throw them away. They're all I have left of him in some ways." "Is that silly?" Robert took the shoes gently, examining them with a practiced eye. The damage was extensive. This would take hours of careful work. Some cobblers would have turned her away or charged a fortune, but he understood loss. He understood holding on to pieces of someone you loved. "It's not silly at all," he said softly. "I can fix them. It'll take some time, but I can make them look almost new again." The woman's face flooded with relief. "Really? How much will it cost?" Robert did a quick mental calculation. The materials he'd need, the hours of work. If he charged what it was truly worth, she'd probably pay it given the sentimental value. He could easily ask for 150, maybe 200. That would buy groceries for 2 weeks, new shoes for Tommy, maybe even put something toward that art camp. But looking at this grieving widow clutching her shopping bag, he couldn't do it. $60, he said. She blinked in surprise. Are you sure? That seems too low for this much work. It's a fair price, Robert assured her. I can have them ready in a few days. The woman reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. I'll come back on Friday. Friday's perfect. After she left, Robert carried the shoes back to his workbench. He should probably eat something before starting. There was half a sandwich in the small fridge in the back room, saved from yesterday, but looking at the amount of work ahead, he decided to just get started. He could eat later. The shop settled back into silence except for the sound of his tools. Outside, the neighborhood grew quiet as families sat down to dinner. Robert imagined Sophie and Tommy at home. Sophie would be making something simple for dinner, too mature for her age, taking care of her little brother. Tommy would be doing his math homework at the kitchen table, probably using one of Robert's old work pencils because they couldn't afford fancy school supplies. Robert picked up his stitching needle and began working on the first shoe. His back already ached, but he pushed the discomfort aside. This was his life now, working until midnight, every single night, trying to build a future for his kids out of worn leather and determination. He didn't know that this particular repair job would change everything. He didn't know that the elderly woman had been watching his shop for the past week. He didn't know that by the time the sun rose tomorrow, his little house would be surrounded by expensive cars and his life would never be the same. All he knew was that these shoes needed fixing, and he was good at fixing broken things. Even if he couldn't seem to fix his own broken life. Robert flipped the sign on his shop door to close at 8 o'clock. The street outside was nearly empty now, just a few cars passing by with their headlights cutting through the darkness. He locked the door and returned to his workbench, rolling up his sleeves. The elderly woman's shoes sat waiting for him under the bright lamp. He'd sent a quick text to Sophie before starting. Working late tonight. Love you both. Leftovers in fridge. Her reply came almost instantly. Okay, Dad, we ate already. Don't work too hard. Followed by a heart emoji. Robert smiled at his phone. His daughter was growing up too fast. The first shoe required complete sole replacement. Robert carefully removed what was left of the old sole, working slowly to avoid damaging the upper leather. This kind of work couldn't be rushed. One wrong cut and the whole shoe would be ruined. His hands moved with the muscle memory of 2 decades, but his mind wandered. He thought about Tommy's parent-teacher conference last week. His son's teacher had pulled him aside. Tommy's doing well in all his subjects, she'd said. But I've noticed he never brings snacks for break time. And his lunch is always pretty minimal. The concern in her eyes had made Robert feel about 2 inches tall. What could he say? That he was doing his best? That sometimes his best wasn't enough? Robert shook his head, forcing himself to focus. The new sole needed to be cut precisely to match the original shape. He traced the pattern carefully, then began cutting the leather with his sharpest blade. The material was thick and tough. His hands cramped, but he kept going. 9 o'clock became 10 o'clock. The heating in the shop had shut off automatically to save electricity. Robert could see his breath in the cold air now. He grabbed an old jacket from the back room and draped it over his shoulders while he worked. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. Caffeine was caffeine. The sole was finally attached, but now came the detailed work. The stitching along the sides needed to be completely redone. Robert threaded his needle with waxed cord, the same kind cobblers had used for hundreds of years. Some things didn't need modern improvements. Sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. As he worked on the stitching, his needle slipped. The point jabbed into his thumb, drawing blood. Robert cursed softly, grabbing a rag to wrap around it. This wasn't the first time, wouldn't be the last. Occupational hazard. He waited for the bleeding to stop, then went right back to stitching. Those shoes wouldn't fix themselves. By 11:30, the first shoe was nearly complete. Just needed polishing. But the second shoe was in even worse condition. Robert picked it up, examining it more carefully. The heel was damaged, partially separated from the rest of the shoe. He'd need to reattach it completely. As he worked on removing the heel, something unexpected happened. A small compartment was revealed inside, hidden in the heel structure. Robert had seen this before in expensive shoes. Sometimes people hid emergency money there or important small items. He peered inside carefully. There was a piece of paper folded several times to fit in the tiny space. Robert hesitated. This felt private, like reading someone's diary, but he needed to remove it to properly fix the heel. He carefully extracted the paper and unfolded it. It was a letter handwritten in neat cursive on expensive stationery. "My dearest Helen," it began. Robert almost stopped reading right there. This was definitely private. But his eyes had already moved to the next line, and something made him continue. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found this letter in my favorite shoes. I hid it here knowing you'd never throw these away, even after I'm no longer around to wear them. You always said I was sentimental about the strangest things." Robert felt a lump forming in his throat. "I want you to know that every step I took in these shoes, I was thinking of you. These shoes walked me down the aisle on our wedding day. They carried me through the hospital corridor when our daughter was born. I wore them the day I finally got my business off the ground, and I wore them to every important meeting after that. They're not just shoes, they're a map of our life together." Robert had to pause. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smudging leather polish on his cheek without realizing it. The letter continued. "I'm writing this now while I'm still healthy, because I want to tell you something important. My success didn't come from being the smartest or the most talented. It came from remembering where I started. I was once so poor I had newspaper in my shoes to cover the holes. People helped me along the way, small kindnesses that they probably forgot about, but I never did." Robert kept reading, drawn into this stranger's words. "I've made a list of the values that mattered most to me: hard work, integrity, treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances, kindness without expectation of return. I've tried to live by these things. I haven't always succeeded, but I've tried. Helen, I want you to find someone who embodies these values, someone who needs help, but would never ask for it, someone who works themselves to the bone for their family. Give them the gift I've set aside. Let them know that good people don't go unnoticed." The letter ended with declarations of love and some personal details that made Robert feel like he was intruding. He carefully refolded the paper. His hands were shaking slightly. This man, whoever he was, had hidden a message for his wife in his shoe. A final act of love and purpose. And that wife was the elderly woman who'd brought these shoes to his shop. Helen. She was still carrying out her husband's wishes, even in her grief. Robert sat back in his chair, staring at the letter. He felt strange, like he'd been given a glimpse into something sacred, a love story that continued even after death. A man who'd found success but never forgot his struggles, who wanted to help others the way he'd been helped. The clock on the wall showed it was past midnight now. Robert carefully placed the letter aside and returned to fixing the heel. But something had shifted in him. He worked with even more care now, more attention to detail. These weren't just shoes anymore. They were a memorial, a testament to a life well lived and a love that endured. He replaced the heel structure completely, making sure it was stronger than before. He restitched every seam with precision. He treated the leather with the best conditioner he had, working it in with his fingers until the material became supple again. He polished both shoes until they gleamed under his work lamp. By 3 a.m, Robert was finished. The shoes looked almost brand new, better than new actually, because they carried history in every stitch. He carefully placed the letter back in its hiding spot in the heel before fully sealing it. That message was for Helen alone. Robert stood up, his back screaming in protest. Every muscle ached. His eyes burned with fatigue. But looking at those restored shoes sitting on his workbench, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride in his work, purpose beyond just survival. He didn't know that Helen had driven past his shop 3 times that night, seeing his lights on, watching him work through her car window. He didn't know she'd made phone calls at midnight, waking up important people with excitement in her voice. He didn't know that tomorrow morning would bring a line of expensive cars and a conversation that would change everything. All Robert knew was that he'd done his best work. For a widow who missed her husband, for a man he'd never met but somehow felt he understood, he cleaned up his workstation, turned off the lights, and headed home through the cold night air. Tomorrow was another day of struggle, another day of trying to provide for his kids on too little money, another day of work, or so he thought. Robert's alarm went off at 6 a.m. He'd only been asleep for 2.5 hours, but his body was so used to running on empty that he dragged himself out of bed anyway. His back felt like someone had tied it in knots. His fingers were stiff and sore, But there were lunches to pack and kids to get ready for school. He stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Sophie was already up, sitting at the table with her sketchbook. She looked up when he entered. "Dad, you look exhausted," she said, concern creasing her forehead. "What time did you get home?" "Not too late," Robert lied, heading to the coffee maker. "Just had a big repair job to finish. Important to a customer." Tommy wandered in, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. "Morning," he yawned. "Morning, buddy. Go get dressed. School in 40 minutes. As Robert made breakfast, the simple kind, toast and eggs, he kept thinking about that letter. About a man who'd built a successful life but remembered his struggles. Who wanted to help others. Robert wondered what that would be like, having enough to give instead of always being the one who needed. "Dad, are you okay?" Sophie asked. "You're staring at the toaster." Robert blinked. The toast had popped up minutes ago and he hadn't even noticed. "Yeah, just tired. Long night." After the kids left for school, Robert got ready to open his shop. He pulled on his work clothes, the same worn jeans and flannel shirt he wore most days. As he opened the front door to head out, he froze. There were cars parked in front of his house. Not just any cars. Expensive cars. A sleek black Mercedes, a silver BMW, a white Lexus that looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor, a Tesla, and another Mercedes, this one dark blue. Robert stood on his porch, confused. His neighborhood didn't see cars like this, ever. He lived on a street of modest homes, old trucks, and sedans held together with hope and duct tape. These vehicles looked like they belonged in a completely different zip code. Neighbors were already gathering on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering. Mrs. Patterson from next door was peering through her curtains. Old Mr. Hernandez was standing on his lawn with his coffee mug, staring. Then Robert noticed the people standing beside the cars. 5 of them. Well-dressed men and women in business clothes, looking at their phones or talking quietly to each other. Waiting for something. Waiting for someone. One of them spotted Robert on his porch. It was Helen, the elderly woman from last night. Her face lit up and she started walking toward him. The others followed. Robert's heart began pounding. Had something gone wrong? Were the shoes damaged? Had he somehow messed up the repair? "Good morning, Robert," Helen called out, her voice warm and excited. "Good morning," Robert managed, his mouth suddenly dry. "Is everything okay?" "The shoes aren't ready yet, you said Friday. The shoes are perfect, I'm sure," Helen interrupted gently. "But that's not why we're here. May we speak with you for a moment?" Robert nodded, too confused to do anything else. His neighbors were definitely watching now. He could feel their stares. Helen gestured to the others. "Robert, these people have come to meet you. They're associates of my late husband, William. Business partners, attorneys, friends." A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Chen, I'm David Park. I was William's business attorney for 20 years. It's an honor to meet you." Robert shook his hand automatically, completely lost. "I don't understand." "What's this about?" A woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor spoke up. "Mr. Chen, my name is Patricia Holmes. I was William's business partner. Helen called us last night. She's been searching for someone special and she believes she's found that person." "You? Me?" Robert looked around at all of them. "I'm just a shoe repairman. I fixed a pair of shoes. That's all I did." Helen stepped closer, her eyes glistening with emotion. "That's not all you did. Last night I drove past your shop 3 times. Your lights were on past 3 in the morning. You were working on my husband's shoes. I watched you through the window for a while. The care you took. The attention to every detail. You treated those worn old shoes like they were precious." "They were precious," Robert said quietly. "To you, that made them important." "Do you know how many cobblers I visited before I found you?" Helen asked. 17. "Most turned me away, said the shoes weren't worth fixing. 3 tried to charge me ridiculous prices, clearly taking advantage of an old woman's sentiment. 2 did terrible work and I had to take the shoes back. But you charged me fairly. You worked through the night. You cared." Robert didn't know what to say. "He'd just done his job," Helen continued, her voice stronger now. "My husband William grew up poor. So poor he went to school with holes in his shoes. He built a successful business from nothing, but he never forgot where he came from. Before he died, he made me promise something. He wanted me to find someone who embodied the values he believed in. Hard work, integrity, someone who serves others without expecting recognition. Someone raising a family on too little money but never compromising on character. Robert's chest tightened. How did she know about his struggles? As if reading his mind, Helen smiled. I've been watching your shop for a week. I saw you skip lunch every day. I saw your children visit you after school, how your daughter brings you food because she knows you won't eat otherwise. I saw your son's 2 small shoes. I asked around the neighborhood. Everyone spoke highly of you. A good father. An honest businessman. Someone who works harder than anyone they've ever met. The attorney, David Park, opened a briefcase. Mr. Chen. William set aside a portion of his estate before he died. $500,000 to be given to someone his wife deemed worthy. Someone who needed help but would never ask for it. Someone who would use the gift not just for themselves but to lift others up as well. Robert felt the world tilt. $500,000. That couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. I can't, he stammered. Patricia Holmes smiled. You can and you will. But there's more. We're not just here to give you money. We're here to offer you opportunities. Each of us owns successful businesses. We were all mentored by William at some point. He taught us to recognize potential and nurture it. Another man stepped forward, younger, maybe in his 30s. I'm Alex Chen, no relation. I own a chain of sustainable fashion stores. I've been looking for someone to partner with on a high-end shoe restoration service. Luxury repair work for designer shoes. After hearing about you from Helen, I think you might be perfect for this. A woman with graying hair spoke next. I'm Dr. Rachel Kim. I run a foundation that provides educational scholarships. Your daughter Sophie is talented in art, I understand. We'd like to offer her a full scholarship to our summer intensive program and support for her college education when the time comes. The last person, a middle-aged man with a kind smile, added, I'm James Liu. I work in commercial real estate. We have several properties that would be perfect for expanding a repair business. Prime locations, fair rent. We help small businesses grow. Robert couldn't breathe. This was too much, too impossible. He was a shoe repairman who could barely afford groceries, and these people in their expensive cars were offering him a fortune and a future. Why? He finally whispered. Why me? Helen took his hand. Her skin was soft and papery, but her grip was firm. Because William believed that good people shouldn't struggle in silence. Because he knew that character matters more than credentials. Because you worked until 3 in the morning to perfectly restore a dead man's shoes for a widow's heart. That's who you are, Robert. That's why you... Robert felt tears burning his eyes. He thought about Sophie giving up her art dreams without complaint. About Tommy's pinched feet and 2 small shoes. About all the times he'd gone to bed exhausted and worried, wondering if he was failing his kids. I don't know what to say, he managed. David Park pulled out an envelope. Say you'll accept. Say you'll use this gift to build something better. For yourself, for your children, and for your community. That's all William ever wanted, to help good people do good things. Robert took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a certified check. $500,000. Made out to him. Real. Tangible. Life-changing. He looked up at these strangers who'd become something more in the span of 10 minutes. They were all smiling at him. Waiting. Hoping. Yes, Robert said, his voice breaking. Yes, I accept. And I promise I'll honor your husband's memory. I'll make this mean something. Helen pulled him into a hug, and Robert Chen, the exhausted shoe repairman who'd worked through the night, finally let himself cry. 3 months had passed since that impossible morning when expensive cars lined Robert's street. 3 months since his life had turned upside down in the best possible way. But standing in his new workshop now, Robert still had to pinch himself sometimes to believe it was real. The new space was 10 times bigger than his old shop. Large windows let in natural light. Proper heating kept the workshop comfortable even in winter. New tools hung on the walls, organized and gleaming. 6 workbenches instead of 1, and at 5 of those benches sat other cobblers, people Robert had hired from the neighborhood. People who'd been struggling just like he had. There was Michael, a 62-year-old Vietnamese immigrant who'd been doing repair work out of his garage for cash under the table. Now he had a proper job with health insurance and a steady paycheck. His hands were skilled, his work meticulous. At the next bench sat Gloria, a single mother of 3 who used to work 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. She'd learned shoe repair from her grandfather and was incredibly talented. Now she worked one full-time job with fair wages and could actually see her kids in the evenings. Then there was Danny, a young man fresh out of foster care with nowhere to go and no experience. Robert had taken a chance on him, taught him the trade from scratch. The kid had turned out to have a natural gift for leather work. Two others rounded out the team. Luis, who'd been laid off from a factory and couldn't find work anywhere. And Keisha, a retired veteran who needed purpose and community as much as income. They'd all become like family. Robert walked through the workshop, checking on everyone's progress. The shop had a name now, painted in gold letters on the window out front. Chen and Sullivan Shoe Restoration. Sullivan was Helen's husband's last name. William Sullivan. Robert had insisted on including it. None of this would exist without that man's generosity. "Robert, can you look at this?" Gloria called out, holding up an expensive loafer. "The customer wants the color restored, but I'm worried about damaging the original leather." Robert came over, examining the shoe carefully. "Good instinct. We'll need to test the dye on the inside first. Always protect the integrity of the original material. That's what separates us from everyone else." This was the business model that had made them successful. While other repair shops did quick, cheap work, Chen and Sullivan specialized in luxury restoration. They took their time. They used the best materials. They treated every shoe like it was irreplaceable because to someone, somewhere, it was. Alex Chen, the fashion entrepreneur who'd approached Robert that first day, had been true to his word. He'd connected Robert with high-end boutiques and wealthy clients who owned designer shoes worth thousands of dollars, people who'd gladly pay premium prices for premium work. The phone rang at the front desk. Danny answered it, his voice professional. "Chen and Sullivan Shoe Restoration, how may I help you?" A pause. "Yes, we absolutely can repair Louboutin heels. We specialize in designer restoration." Another pause. "We can have them ready in a week. Our rate is $150 for that type of repair." Robert smiled. A year ago he'd have been terrified to charge that much. Now he understood something important. When you did exceptional work, people paid for it gladly. And those higher prices meant he could pay his employees well, use quality materials, and still build something sustainable. But the business wasn't the only thing that had changed. Robert's home life had transformed too. Sophie was thriving. Dr. Rachel Kim's foundation had followed through on their promise. Sophie had attended that art summer camp after all, the one she'd quietly given up on. She'd come home glowing, full of stories about techniques she'd learned and friends she'd made. Now she was taking advanced art classes after school. And college didn't seem like an impossible dream anymore. It seemed like a plan. Just last week, Sophie had shown Robert her newest painting. It was a portrait of him in his old workshop, hunched over his bench working by lamplight. She'd captured something in it that made Robert's throat tight. The dignity in hard work, the love in sacrifice. She'd titled it My Hero. Tommy had new shoes now, several pairs actually in the right size. But more than that, he'd stopped walking around with that careful, guarded expression. Kids shouldn't have to worry about money. They should get to be kids. And finally, Tommy was getting that chance. He'd joined the school robotics club, something Robert never could have afforded before. Tommy came home excited, talking about circuits and programming and competitions. His eyes lit up the way Sophie's did when she talked about art. Every child deserved to have their eyes light up like that. Robert had moved his family to a better apartment too. Nothing fancy, he wasn't trying to live like a millionaire. But it had 3 bedrooms instead of 2, so the kids didn't have to share anymore. It had heating that actually worked. A kitchen with appliances that didn't break down every other week. It was enough. The money Helen had given him, that $500,000, Robert had been careful with it. He'd put half into savings and investments for his kids' futures. College funds, security. The other half he'd used to start the business properly. Equipment, space, inventory, payroll, and something else. Something William Sullivan's letter had specifically mentioned: helping others. Robert had started a small scholarship fund at the local high school. Nothing huge, but enough to help 5 kids a year with supplies, fees, activities they couldn't otherwise afford. Art camp for kids like Sophie used to be. Sports equipment for kids like Tommy. SAT prep courses. School trips. The things that seemed small but weren't small at all to the families who couldn't afford them. He'd done it quietly, anonymously at first, until Helen found out and scolded him. William wanted recognition for good deeds, she'd said, because it inspires others to do good too. Don't hide your light, Robert. So the scholarship was named now. The Linda Chen Memorial Scholarship after his late wife. She would have loved knowing her name was helping kids. She'd always been the generous one. The one who volunteered at school and donated to bake sales even when they barely had enough for themselves. Helen had become a regular part of their lives. She came to Sunday dinners at Robert's apartment, bringing dessert and stories about William. She'd taken to Sophie and Tommy like they were her own grandchildren. The kids called her Grandma Helen now, and she lit up every time. Last Sunday, she'd sat in Robert's modest living room, watching Tommy show her his latest robotics project while Sophie sketched at the table. She'd leaned over to Robert and whispered, "William would have loved this, watching good things grow from his gift. This is exactly what he wanted." Robert's old shop was still there, the tiny space where he'd worked all those years.
He hadn't sold it or rented it out.
Instead, he went there one day a week alone and took repair jobs for free. People from the neighborhood who couldn't afford his new shop's prices. Elderly folks on fixed incomes, struggling families. He'd post a sign, "Free repairs. Wednesdays only. First come, first served." Some of the other cobblers thought he was crazy. Why work for free when business was booming? But Robert understood something they didn't. He remembered what it felt like to need help and be too proud to ask. He remembered counting pennies for groceries. That version of himself still existed out there in other people, and he could help them the way he'd been helped. Michael had started joining him on Wednesdays. Then Gloria. Now most of his team rotated through, giving their time. They understood. They'd all been there. One Wednesday afternoon, a young mother came in with her son's school shoes. They were falling apart. She looked embarrassed, asking for help. "It's what we're here for," Robert assured her. "We'll have them fixed in an hour." While they worked, the woman watched. Her son, maybe 8 years old, sat quietly, too quietly. Robert recognized that look. The kind of careful stillness kids developed when they knew their parent was stressed about money. "You're really doing this for free?" the woman asked. "Why?" Robert smiled. "Because someone did something incredibly kind for me once. This is how I pay it forward." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You have no idea what this means. I just started a new job, but the first paycheck hasn't come yet, and his shoes were giving him blisters, but I didn't have—" She stopped, composing herself. "Thank you." After they left, Robert cleaned his tools. This old shop smelled the same as it always had. Leather and polish and possibility. So much had changed, but this space kept him grounded, kept him remembering where he came from. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Dad, when are you coming home? Grandma Helen is here and she brought your favorite cake." Robert locked up the old shop and headed to his car. Not the same old beater he used to drive. That one had finally died. He'd bought something reliable now, nothing fancy, just dependable. He didn't need flash. He needed function. As he drove home through familiar streets past the neighborhoods where he'd struggled for so many years, Robert thought about William Sullivan. A man he'd never met but who'd changed his life completely. A man who'd believed that good people deserved good things. That kindness should be rewarded. That success meant nothing if you didn't use it to lift others up. Robert had been given an extraordinary gift, and every single day he tried to prove himself worthy of it, not just through business success, but through living the values that gift represented: hard work, integrity, generosity, kindness. He pulled into his parking spot and looked up at his apartment building. Light glowed in his windows. His family was up there, his kids thriving. Helen, who'd become family, a life he'd never dreamed possible, was now his reality. And tomorrow, he'd get up and do it all again. Work hard, treat people well, pay it forward. That was the real gift William Sullivan had given him. Not just money, but purpose. Not just opportunity, but responsibility. The chance to be the kind of man who made the world a little bit better. Robert grabbed his jacket and headed inside, toward the warmth and laughter waiting for him. Toward home, 1 year. That's how long it had been since Helen walked into Robert's old shop with her husband's worn shoes. 1 year since 5 expensive cars appeared on his street. 1 year since everything changed. Robert stood in the community center, adjusting his tie nervously. He wasn't used to wearing ties. Give him a work apron any day over this uncomfortable formal wear. But today was special. Today was the first annual William Sullivan Legacy Celebration, and Robert was supposed to give a speech. The community center was packed. Over 200 people had shown up. Robert recognized many faces, his employees and their families, students who'd received scholarships from the fund, business owners from the neighborhood, people whose shoes he'd repaired for free on those Wednesday afternoons. And sitting in the front row, smiling up at him with pride, were Sophie and Tommy flanking Helen on either side. Sophie had turned 16 last month. She'd grown taller, more confident. She was applying to art schools now, prestigious ones, and actually had a real shot at getting in. Her portfolio was full of beautiful work. Just last week, one of her paintings had won a regional competition. The prize money she'd immediately donated to the scholarship fund. "Paying it forward like you taught me, Dad," she'd said. Tommy sat next to her, lanky and growing too fast. 13 now, full of energy and ideas. His robotics team had made it to the state championships. He wore a shirt and tie today, looking uncomfortably formal just like his father, but his eyes were bright with pride. Helen sat between them, elegant in a navy dress, wearing the pearl necklace William had given her on their 40th anniversary. She looked happy, not the grieving widow who'd walked into his shop a year ago, but someone who'd found purpose in her grief, who'd turned loss into legacy. David Park, William's attorney, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We're here to celebrate something extraordinary. 1 year ago, Helen Sullivan honored her late husband's final wish. She found someone who embodied the values William held dear, and she changed that person's life. But what happened next, well, that exceeded everyone's expectations." The crowd applauded politely. Robert shifted his weight, wishing he could disappear. David continued. "In 1 year, Robert Chen hasn't just built a successful business. He's created a model for what community support looks like. He's employed 7 people who were struggling to find work. He's provided 20 scholarships to local students. He's repaired shoes for free for over 300 families. He's mentored 5 apprentices in the cobbler trade, keeping a dying art alive. And he's inspired countless others to think about how they can give back." More applause, louder this time. Robert felt his face heating up. He hadn't done these things for recognition. He'd done them because they felt right, because he remembered what it was like to struggle. "And now," David said, turning toward Robert, "I'd like to invite Robert Chen to share his story." Robert took a deep breath and walked to the microphone. 200 faces stared back at him expectantly. His hands were sweating. "Hi," he started, his voice cracking slightly. Someone in the audience laughed kindly, and it helped him relax a little. "I'm not good at speeches. I'm better with shoes than words. But I'll try." He looked at Helen. She nodded encouragingly. "A year ago, I was barely keeping my head above water. I worked 16-hour days and still couldn't make ends meet. My kids were making sacrifices no kids should have to make. I felt like I was failing them every single day, no matter how hard I worked. And I did work hard. That was the only thing I knew how to do." Robert paused, gathering his thoughts. "Then Helen walked into my shop with her husband's shoes. Honestly, when I first saw them, I thought about how much I needed the money. I could have charged her a lot more than I did. She would have paid it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was knowing how it felt to lose someone you love. Maybe it was just trying to be the kind of person my wife would have been proud of." Sophie wiped her eyes. Tommy reached over and squeezed her hand. "I stayed up until 3 in the morning fixing those shoes, not because I had to, but because they mattered. They were someone's memories, someone's history. And while I was working, I found a letter hidden inside. A letter from William Sullivan to his wife, about values and kindness and remembering where you come from." Helen was crying now too, quiet tears running down her cheeks. "That letter changed something in me, even before I knew about any gift or opportunity. It reminded me that how you do things matters, that dignity exists in all work, whether you're a CEO or a cobbler, that good people are everywhere, often struggling quietly, and they deserve to be seen." Robert looked around the room. "When Helen gave me that incredible gift, I was overwhelmed. $500,000. Life-changing money. But the real gift wasn't the money. It was the message behind it. That I mattered. That my hard work had value. That good things could happen to good people. Do you know how powerful that is? To have someone see you, really see you, and say you're worth investing in?" The room was silent except for some sniffling. Robert pressed on. "I could have taken that money and just made my own life comfortable. Nobody would have blamed me. But William's letter kept echoing in my head. He'd been helped when he was struggling. He'd never forgotten. He wanted to create a ripple effect of kindness. And I realized that's what I wanted too. Robert gestured toward his employees scattered throughout the audience. Michael was doing repairs in his garage for cash, no benefits, no security. Gloria was working 3 jobs and never seeing her kids. Danny had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Luis couldn't find work after his factory closed. Keisha needed purpose after retiring from the military. They're all talented, hardworking people who just needed a chance. Just like I needed a chance. Michael stood up and started clapping. Then Gloria. Then others. Soon the whole room was standing applauding. Robert had to stop talking until they sat back down. The scholarship fund, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. That's named after my wife, Linda. She passed away 3 years ago. She was the kind of person who gave even when we had nothing to give. She'd volunteer at school, help neighbors, donate to every fundraiser. She saw needs and tried to fill them. This fund, helping kids get opportunities they couldn't otherwise afford, that's her legacy continuing. That's her kindness living on. He looked at his kids.
Sophie, Tommy, you guys sacrificed so much during the hard years.
You never complained. You were patient and understanding beyond your years, but kids shouldn't have to be that grown up. They should get to dream big and pursue those dreams. This fund makes sure other kids don't have to give up their dreams because their parents are struggling. Robert turned back to the broader audience. Here's what I've learned this year. Kindness isn't just nice. It's powerful. It's transformative. When someone shows you kindness, especially when you're at your lowest, it doesn't just help you. It changes you. It makes you want to pass it on. William Sullivan created a ripple that's still spreading. Helen threw a stone in the water when she gave me that gift, and the waves just keep going. He pointed toward the back of the room where a display board showed photos. Every Wednesday we do free repairs at my old shop. I've met hundreds of people this year. Single parents working 2 jobs. Elderly folks on fixed incomes. Immigrants trying to make it in a new country. People who remind me of who I was. And every time I fix someone's shoes for free, I'm not just repairing leather. I'm saying, I see you. Your struggle matters. You're not invisible. Robert's voice grew stronger. We've started training programs too. Teaching young people the cobbler trade. It's a dying art, but it's also a valuable skill. We've got 3 apprentices now who'll be able to support themselves with this craft. We're planning to open a 2nd location next year in another underserved neighborhood. More jobs, more opportunities. More ripples. He looked at Helen again. I never got to meet William Sullivan, but I feel like I know him through his actions, through his letter, through his wife's incredible dedication to honoring his memory. He was a man who understood that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others. That's the legacy he left, and I hope in some small way I'm carrying that forward. Robert took a breath. So thank you, Helen, for seeing something in me worth investing in. Thank you to everyone who supported this journey. Thank you to my employees who work with such skill and care every day. Thank you to my kids for being patient with a dad who still works too much, even though now it's by choice rather than desperation. He smiled, feeling tears on his own cheeks now. And thank you, William Sullivan, wherever you are, for believing that good people deserve good things. For creating a legacy of kindness. For reminding us all that how we treat people matters. That dignity exists in all honest work. That small acts of generosity can change entire lives. The room erupted in applause. People stood again, clapping, some wiping tears. Robert stepped away from the microphone and was immediately engulfed in a hug from Sophie and Tommy. Helen joined them, and for a moment they just stood there, a family bound not by blood but by love and shared purpose. Later that evening, after the celebration ended, Robert sat in his old workshop, the small space where it had all begun. He held William's restored shoes in his hands, the ones that had started everything. Helen had given them back to him today, a gift. Keep them, she'd said. They brought me to you. They changed both our lives. They should stay with you. Robert ran his fingers over the leather. Perfect stitches, glossy shine. And hidden in the heel, that letter. The letter that had reminded him who he wanted to be. He thought about how life could change in unexpected ways. How kindness could echo across time. How a struggling cobbler could become someone who helped others struggle less. How grief could transform into purpose. How a pair of old shoes could change the world, at least a small corner of it. Robert placed the shoes on a shelf where he could see them while he worked. A reminder, a responsibility, a promise to keep the ripples going. Tomorrow he'd open his shop. He'd work with his team. He'd repair shoes with care and skill. He'd help someone who needed it. He'd live the values that William had believed in, and that Helen had trusted him to carry forward. But tonight he just sat in the quiet workshop, grateful for second chances, for kind strangers who became family, for the reminder that good people existed everywhere, often working quietly in the background just waiting to be seen, and for shoes, beautiful, meaningful shoes that carried people through their lives and sometimes, if you were very lucky, carried you toward a better future.